Before Metallica was selling out stadiums, before Slayer made parents genuinely afraid, before thrash metal had a name, a scene, or even a genre, there were 5 kids from Queens and the Bronx making the loudest, most obnoxious racket New York City had ever heard, and nobody wanted anything to do with them. This is the story of Anthrax, and it starts not with a bang, but with a rehearsal room, a lot of arguments, and a whole lot of rejection. It's 1981. Scott Ian and Danny Lilker are teenagers obsessed with the heaviest music on the planet. Motorhead, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. They've been playing together in various forms, trying to get something off the ground, and they decide to get serious. They pulled together a lineup and called the band Anthrax, after the livestock disease, because they thought it sounded menacing and a little bit stupid, which honestly is a perfect description of where heavy metal was heading. The early lineup is a revolving door. Scott Ian is the constant, the rhythm guitarist, the guy with the vision, the one who simply refuses to quit. Neil Turbin comes in as vocalist. Danny Lilker holds on the bass. Dan Spitz takes lead guitar, and behind the kit, a young Charlie Benante, who would go on to be considered one of the most influential drummers in the genre. This is the core that would record Fistful of Metal, but getting there, that's a whole other story. Before they ever lay foot in a proper studio, Anthrax had already burned through members. Vocalists came and went. The band went through a guitarist named Greg Walls before Dan Spitz locked in the spot. There was a version of the band that probably would have gone nowhere and broken up in the basement in Queens. The fact that they pushed through that early chaos says a lot about the stubbornness. And let's call it what it is, the absolute bloody-mindedness of Scott Ian. By the time the lineup stabilizes with Turbin, Lilker, Spitz, Ian, and Benante, there's something real happening. It's raw, it's loud, it doesn't sound like anything on the radio, it barely sounds like anything on earth, but it's alive. Before the album, there's a demo. In 1982, Anthrax recorded a self-financed demo, rough, lo-fi, barely produced, but it captures the energy. Songs are being written fast, played fast, and the tempos are pushing into territory that most metal bands haven't touched yet. This isn't the plodding doom of Black Sabbath or the polished melodic metal of Judas Priest. This was something sharper, angrier, and more urgent. The demo gets some notice locally, and they start building a reputation on the New York club circuit. Venues that were basically closet-sized rooms where the sweat dripped off the ceiling and the audience was close enough to lose teeth if someone wasn't careful. It's not glamorous, but it's real, and it's how scenes get built. Here's where things shift. Megaforce Records was a tiny independent label out of New Jersey run by Johnny Z Zazula and his wife Marcia. If you don't know the name, you should, because Johnny Z was arguably the most important figure in American thrash metal history. He had already signed Metallica, which alone would have secured his legacy, but he saw something in Anthrax. Getting signed to Megaforce wasn't a golden ticket. This wasn't a major label deal with tour buses and catering. This was a handshake from a guy who believed in heavy music at a time when the entire industry thought it was a dead end. What Megaforce offered was a chance, resources just enough to record a real album and get it out into the world. That was enough. The album was recorded in 1983 and released January 1984. The production was handled by Carl Kennedy, drummer of the Rods, a guy who understood heavy without trying to sand the edges off, and Fistful of Metal has edges, some really sharp ones. The production is no frills by any standard. It sounds like a band playing in a room, which is exactly where it is. There's no studio gloss, no polished sheen, no attempt to make it palatable for mainstream radio. It is unapologetically, defiantly heavy. Guitars are thick and crunchy. Charlie Benante's drumming is absolutely ferocious. This guy is 19 years old and playing like he has something to prove to the entire world. And Neil Turbin's vocals are raw, high-pitched, and aggressive in that very specific early thrash way. If you're coming to a Fistful of Metal fresh, here's what to expect. It sits right on the line between traditional heavy metal and what will become thrash. You hear the new wave of British heavy metal influence, the galloping rhythms, the twin guitar attack, but there's also this relentless aggression, this tempo, this tightness that pushes it into different territory. It's not as fast or technically complex as what Anthrax would later make, but that's not a criticism. This is a band finding its voice, and that process is genuinely exciting to listen to. There's an energy here that can't be manufactured. Death Rider opens the album, and it's a statement of intent. Fast, aggressive, and immediately in your face. No intro, no easing in, just a band announcing themselves. Metal Thrashing Mad is arguably the centerpiece, and yes, that title is on the nose, but earns every bit of it. It became a fan favorite early and easy to hear why it's anthemic in a way only genuinely dumb in the best way metal can be. And then there's a cover, Anthrax tackle Alice Cooper's I'm 18, and look, covering a classic rock song in a thrash metal context could go wrong in about 100 different ways, but they pull it off. They keep the song recognizable while making it completely their own, stripping out the arena rock production and replacing it with raw aggression. Smart choice. Actually, it connects them to a lineage while proving they can do something different with it. And for a lot of younger listeners at the time, it was probably their introduction to the original. The rest of the album is solid, but I want to talk about 3 more tracks, and they're towards the end of the album. And what's really interesting about these 3 tracks is that they show a band already thinking beyond the usual metal cliches, even on their debut. Take Death from Above, which is written entirely from the perspective of a combat pilot. Lyrically, it's vivid and specific, screaming through the sky, turbo engines igniting, framing the aerial strike to almost cosmic vengeance against tyrants. Not just aggression for aggression's sake, there's actually a concept behind it. Then the self-titled track, Anthrax, goes somewhere completely different. Visceral, biological horror. Lines about blood and unstoppable plague, using the disease itself as a kind of sonic persona for the band. Scott Ian literally picked the name out of a biology textbook because it sounded evil enough, and then they wrote a whole song to match that energy. In closing the album, Howling Furies pulls from classical mythology. The opening line is a direct nod to Dante's Inferno, and the whole track is built around the idea of karmic damnation for a life lived corruptly. So we got fighter jets, a bacterial plague, and ancient Greek mythology, all on one debut album. These guys had range from day one. Critics in 1984 didn't really know what to do with Fistful of Metal, which is honestly the correct response to any genuinely new thing. The mainstream rock press was still obsessed with hair metal and whatever was happening on the Sunset Strip. A bunch of guys from Queens playing this fast and this loud wasn't exactly what Rolling Stone writers were looking for. But within the underground, the tape traders, the metal maniacs, kids reading Kerrang and Metal Forces, the album landed. It got passed around, it got talked about. And slowly, the reputation built. It wasn't a commercial success by any conventional measure. It was the kind of record that turned listeners into disciples. That matters more in the long run. Fistful of Metal is the beginning. It's imperfect, it's raw, and in some ways it sounds like a band that just hasn't fully figured out what it wants to be yet. But there's also, that's what makes it fascinating. You're hearing the foundation being poured. You're hearing that first draft of something that would eventually become one of the most beloved catalogs in heavy metal history. The band that made this record would change significantly in the years ahead. Danny Lilker would be out, replaced by Frank Bello. Neil Turbin wouldn't last much longer either. And when his replacement walked through the door, something clicked into place that hadn't been there before. His name was Joey Belladonna. And when he joined Anthrax, everything changed. That story, the real commercial breakthrough, the albums that made Anthrax household names in metal, the spreading the disease era and Among the Living, that's going to be chapter 2. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around for it. Make sure you're subscribed and check out this playlist. It probably only has like one video at this point, but this is the start of my Anthrax series. I'm going to be reviewing every album about once a week up until the new album is released in September. So this is a new series for me. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.